So again, this is the Lady of Illusion, Niguma, and I wanted to get into some of her Dzogchen Mahamudra for sure. But before that, because there's not so much known about Naguma, I wanted to also share a little bit of the biography, the hagiography, as they're known. And so far from this, uh, we can contextualize that we're about 1,000 years ago, a long time. And I'm hoping that later on in the text you'll get to see the Dzogchen has not changed one bit in 1,000 years, and even 2,000, 3,000 years. So you have many folks that basically venerate and follow those like Naguma and Naropa, but they don't really follow what they were teaching, what the main point was. And so those of you who meditated today, you're here with your experience for 10 minutes, you're accessing what Naguma was trying to share with us. And so we can kind of be spectators in the audience with this stuff, or we can, like our group, submerge into the nature of mind. But here's one of my favorite topics. I just want to say again, this book is by Sarah Harding, translated around 2010 and written around 2010. So far, we found out that Naguma was most likely the teacher of Naropa, along with Sukasedi, and Lavapa was most likely Naguma's teacher. For those of you keeping track of ancient lineages. Remember, we have the Nyingma tradition, which is considered the ancient school of Tibetan Buddhism. Started around the 7th, 8th century with Padmasambhava and Shantarakshita, King Tresendetsen, and that's known as the Kenlocho. Kenlocho. Kempo Shantarakshita. Padmasambhava was actually a Lopan. A Lopan is a qualified teacher who's been through several years of education. So not only was he a tantric master, Dzogchen master, also probably was educated at one of the viharas, one of the temples. So, and they seemed more like Dharma universities at that time, like Naropa and the great Mahaviharas. And then there's Chopin, King Dressen Detsen. Chopin, Songtsen Gumpo. Did I get those confused? Yeah, Chokin. It goes Ken Lo Cho. That's Tibetan, so those are abbreviations. Anyway, around the 7th, 8th century is when the Nyingma really started to be established, and Tumi Samboda, for example, went to India to study Sanskrit, to learn the language, and they formulated the Tibetan alphabet. And they only did that to facilitate the Dharma. Then, not long after, we had the Tibetan dictionary. Actually, it may have been a couple hundred years after where they established the lexicon. But main point there is the Nyingmapas did come very early to Tibet, and then most likely before that the Dharma came, but because the Tibetans could not read, and well, there could be other reasons we don't really know. That's we're talking pre-6th, 5th century here, very early. And the way that Tibet would have gotten the Dharma so early would have been travels through the Silk Road, right? The Tarim Basin and all that. north of Tibet, where there were Dharma pilgrimages happening in the time of Buddha Shakyamuni. So many of these discoveries, you have to look at the locals and what the locals are saying in these stories that have been going for thousands of years. The academics will have a hard time piecing things together, like the locals in Khotan and Kushta in the Tarim Basin, which is north of Tibet. They will tell you that Buddha Shakyamuni was there, and I'm inclined to believe that. And of course, then they have these relics and these ancient places that they venerate, which gives us more evidence. So the point I'm getting to here is there were these Dharma transmissions, and not only were they physically on the outer kept secret because of the Islamic invasions, and even Tibet's own kings like Long Dharma were turning on the teachings and destroying the Nyingma monasteries and establishments very early, 8th century already. So it wasn't until the 12th century, 11th, 12th, when the Sarma migration happened and the Anuttara Yoga Tantras were established. And that's probably the context that we'll find Niguma as part of a later migration. It almost seems like they were pushed into the northern part of India by predominantly Muslim areas, and then the conquerors. And forced conversion is a huge part of religion. So this tends to wash away and erase a lot of our history, right? Our Dharma history. And I feel like there was a lost connection, like people can't piece together from the 6th to the 8th century. There's a lot missing in those 300 years. And that 6th century, technically 642, I think it was, when the Islamic invasion started. So that would be 7th century, yeah. Excuse me. So it would have started in the 7th century, and little trickles of conquest coming in the 6th already. So that being said, we have this kind of Dunhong Cave manuscripts and various other locations where it seems they were hiding on a physical level. Now, on the inner level, everything is self-secret. Everything is Twilight language or code language, as Sarah Harding's using here. And so this is one of my favorite things. I love reading through a text, and it's from 1500 years ago, and you can decode it. You can understand what it's saying because you studied the Dharma, and you also have the realizations. You did the meditation. So that's what she's going to go into, and I encourage everybody here that you can even find on Wiki. It says Twilight language. They have a section on it, and it can be really fun for a Dharma practitioner. You get to see multi dimensions into text, read between the lines, read over and under the lines, read through the lines. So, yeah, that can be quite fun, but it has spurred endless confusion. Deities are venerated as external entities rather than personifications of the mind. Pure realms are prayed to as an external place you can go to later on, rather than accepting the purity of our mind now, entertaining that it could be heaven on earth, right? So we do this thing where we separate from divinity and we disempower ourselves to these various misunderstandings, like externalizing deities is a huge one, or externalizing pure realms. And many people get stuck at that stage. They just venerate a deity. So imagine if you venerate Manjushri, which is the personification of wisdom. And I'm sure there are people named Manjushri and bodhisattvas named Manjushri, but we have to understand the difference. So imagine you just worship Manjushri all the time. You make incense offerings and light and water offerings all the time. Well, you're just worshiping your own wisdom. And it can't be bad, right? to venerate your own wisdom, to honor that. Uh, but it's probably better to understand the ultimate truth. So part of this code language, Twilight language, is reading the allegories within deities. Medicine Buddha can represent the Sambhogakaya aspect of your mind and healing that we all find. Um, when you see an animal licking their wound, that's medicine Buddha. When somebody's trying to help you by bringing you medicine, that's medicine Buddha. So it's it's the aspect of healing within our collective minds, within our collective consciousness. And the same goes for Tara, representing the Dharmakaya, and many personifications of the feminine Buddha are representing emptiness, the lack of a substantial existence, lack of a finding reference point. Avalokiteshvara is probably one of the most famous personifications of compassion, right? Known as Chenrezig in Tibetan, or Kuan Yin, also in Eastern Asia. So there we're just worshiping compassion. Wonderful. But when we venerate so much like this is some external person, then we may lose touch with our own compassion and our own capacity for kindness. So, that being said, uh, yes, it's great to worship compassion, and maybe some compassion will come to you through that. But better to understand that that's a allegory, that's a metaphor, personification, an archetype. Okay, and you'll see this really. It goes much deeper than that. The enumerations are endless. Yesterday, I was joking around. I did. There's one ekayana, or I think it's etkayana or something like that, where there's only one path, right? We hear three yanas, three vehicles, but there's this etkayana, which is one yana, which is nice. Then we have the the two truths and the three poisons and the four noble truths and the five kleshas and the six perfections and the 7 points of postures. See how we can keep on going. And then you'll see these enumerations. For example, a text may say, please go into the 7 points of posture, and we're going to practice the four methods of letting go. And if you don't know those enumerations, well, you're kind of screwed there. All right. So that is my short little explanation of how code language, how Twilight language can work. The Hivadra Tantra you're asking about, Oza? Yeah, well, it's not tech. It's not technically the highest yoga. It's it's the highest tantra, but I'm pretty sure highest yoga tantra refers to Maha and Anu yoga within the nine yanas. So technically, the tantras on Dzogchen would be higher. Mhm. But I'm not an expert. You know, these lamas, these Tibetan lamas, are so educated on this stuff, very thoroughly educated. I might need to go take another 3 year retreat just to catch up a little bit. But we do, we do have a lot, and I just keep on learning and keep on sharing my opinion in case it benefits. So here's a code language, the symbolic or code language of the Dakinis. Khandro Dakya is itself truly hidden. Masters of meditation decipher these communications in moments of inspiration. But by the time we hear what they might be, they have already been translated and carry all the perils of the craft, including possible fraud. Yeah, and by the way, for those of you who are Western code breakers, you're gonna have an extra challenge because your translators, they do not know the Twilight language. They don't know the code. So they're just like very clunky. For example, this trend of allowing college students to translate profound Dharma texts. Nothing against college students at all, but it's best to vet people. Do they have realization? Or at least have somebody who's realized with the translator, because exactly what's being said here, we can lose so much of this code by somebody who's immature going in there, translating it verbatim, and next thing you know, you've lost parts of it. So, we can see a few indecipherable graphics called Dakini code letters, Khandro, Dagi, and treasure text, but even this is only a subcategory of the mystery code language itself. All right, so I'll explain that. There's oral transmission lineages, there are scriptural transmission lineages, but there are also symbolic indication lineages, like liberation upon seeing. It's called Dakini script. I've never heard it called Dakini code letters. Growing up, I've always heard it called Dakini script. And when you see it, when you look at it, it's supposed to be very beneficial for the consciousness, for that liberation of the conditioned consciousness. So, in this commentary on the treasure text, Lamrim Yeshi Ningpo, Jumgyong Control explains a person endowed with the karmic continuation and destiny will, by means of a profound coincidence of place, time, and aspiration, be able to decode the symbolic meaning of these treasure letters that are Nirmanakayas, the Vajra forms endowed with all eminent aspects, and establish them correctly in writing. So he's basically saying you can decode it. Perhaps the Dakini code language is beyond verbal communication, with its necessarily dualistic and designatory nature. But then, why call it language? Symbolic communication is specifically distinguished from nonverbal transmission in the Nigma tripartite transmissions of Dzogchen. Tripartite? I'm sorry, everybody. Sarah Harding has a huge vocabulary, and there are a few words that I'm still learning. Not few, lots of words for me to still learn. But there will be a few hiccups every now and then when I run into a new word, and I'm not ashamed of that. But I ask you to bear with me if the flow breaks a little bit. So, tripartite, very nice word, new word for me. And I imagine they're talking about the three classes of Samdi, Longdim, and Gagdi. So, it says symbolic communication, specifically tripartite. Three, three parts to the three-part word. Yeah. All right, I got it, everybody. I got it the first time. You got to give me credit when I get it. But then why call it language? Symbolic communication is specifically distinguished from nonverbal transmission in the Nyingma tripartite transmissions of Dzogchen teaching, where the symbolic lineage of the awareness holders falls neatly between the nonverbal lineage of the Buddha's thought or intention and the oral lineage of ordinary people. Oh, I think she's talking about the tripartite that I just mentioned, actually, the oral, scriptural, and symbolic lineage. So Rigzen de Kyupa. Janet Gyatso suggests that the Dakini, in keeping with her playful character, is working within language to subvert it, drawing attention to its own dualistic structures while never retreating outside its realm. And certainly the esoteric teachings of the Tantras themselves, in their written form, are known to be coded. After all, the common name of those teachings is secret mantra, Sang Ngag. The Dakini code language is a secret within that secret and seems to be reserved for the most profound and spontaneous experiences of only very gifted practitioners. And that would include you all. Whether you found us on purpose because you love Dzogchen Mahamudra, because you did your Nundro practices and you want a community to immerse into the view with, whether you found us by accident and you just have a meditation background or a religious background, you have met with Dzogchen. And I always quote Longchenpa from that book called The Practice of Dzogchen, a collection of Longchen Rabjam's writings. Um, in the very beginning, he tells us that you would be wasting your life force not to continue with Dzogchen or not to authentically come into that. And so, yeah, you're not going to see groups like this around everywhere. They're few and far between, but you are part of one. And so by calling everybody, all of you gifted practitioners, what I'm saying is that you may think that I just say that to everybody. Oh, you say that to everybody. But no, that's not the case, you see. Um, there are few Dzogchen groups out there. We just happen to be very, very lucky. Our group grew in an authentic way. We had all these wonderful practitioners supporting each other. And it happened through the grassroots. Um, but this group, you are exceptional, know that. So Tarnata makes no attempt to tell us what the name Naguma really means in that language, leaving it rather to be initiated to find out, to the initiated to find out. Hmm. Wow, that threw me off because uh, they're saying, the Naguma, or at least one source that I know of, is saying that Naguma is a mispronunciation of Natula, and Natula is a negation, ne meaning not, and Tula meaning comparable. So not comparable, and that's supposedly that's the best guess I've heard where the word Naguma comes from. Other than that, I don't like the suggestion here that once you are enlightened, you know what Naguma means. The name Naguma means. That may be making a little bit bigger deal uh, out of it than there is. But anyway, in a similar way, it is difficult to precisely identify Naguma's other attributes that recur in most sources, although they are reported as quantifiable facts. She had high level realization, placing her in the pure Dakpa, or non dissipating Zame grounds. She attained the so called rainbow body, and most famously, she could receive teachings directly from Vajradhara. That just means your awareness, really. Empty cognizance. What do these qualities actually mean apart from being ways to impress us? I don't know, but the flow of this text doesn't impress me very much sometimes.